So welcome, all of you out there in the land of Oz, to tonight, well, your daily forecast. No, I'm just joking. I've been teaching today to a group of 6 who came to learn cheese making from us. So I'm really in the mode of teaching, and I'm excited to be doing this presentation. I'm going to Rachel's going to pitch in a little bit, and we're going to run for about 45 minutes and then open it up for questions. So I hope that we get some from you guys. And the focus of the presentation is wash curd cheese. So this is a process that is pretty widespread amongst cheesemakers, and I'll be going into great detail about why it's an important step in the cheese making process and what it does to change aspects of cheese character.
Oops.
Just click on this guy.
I'll do it. How about that?
Okay. But then I need to use the pointer.
Right.
So first, we would like to share some history of how the idea of using water as an ingredient in cheese making was started. And this was when in the culture of us humans, we were moving beyond just having cheeses that were relatively fresh and more perishable, and with the desire to create cheese that was drier and could be transported. Particularly in the Roman times, we have the first references in 60 AD by Columella. I had to look at that because it's hard to pronounce. So this was, of course, very important in the spread of people being able to try cheese and from a different place. And so one of the stories was about the Roman legions. This is one of the staples of their diet, was the hard Roman cheese, Romano cheese. And through the spread of this, just adding very hot water to the tub that they were making the cheese in, it led to new ideas. Of course, with the advent of cauldrons of metal, you could direct heat and make drier cheeses. But it started before that, when you could just be adding hot water directly to a vessel with the curds in it. This idea of taking and adding hot water to curds that were being stirred in the whey was what the colonists brought here to where Rachel and I live. The Puritans came here and settled, and they made cheese in that way. They had wooden tubs, and they made these what were called Yankee style cheeses. Over in England, they became known as Yankee style cheeses. All right, click. So essentially, the scalding in the UK, they talk about it as just heating the curds in the whey, but the first references to it in England were when they began to use this term scalding, was when they took out whey, heated it up, and added it back. And that was a way to make cheeses that had higher acidity and were able to keep longer than previously when they didn't do any kind of cooking. So that was either in England or in Holland is when that started. And the first mention of it in Holland was using to make Edam cheese. That spread.
It's not clicking. It's Just let me do
moving
it.
it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So the next step in the process of getting to what we call curd washing occurred when someone in Holland who was making Gouda decided to, instead of adding the whey back as hot warmed up whey or heated whey, they just used hot water. And this was quite dramatic in terms of what it did to the cheese quality. And thereafter, it got spread down to, it spread up again to the north of Holland, and Edam cheesemakers began to do it. And it never really caught on, like this technique never really caught on in the UK. So, as I said, around this time was the colonies were developing here in New England, and they were still using the heated up whey or the heated up water and not taking whey out and then leaving it out.
In the same way that empire was sort of a driving force, Romans going out, traveling into other countries and dominating. Similarly, with the Dutch and their trade routes, this technique made it possible to have cheeses that were they were much more stable, that they wouldn't go off rot. The
Wouldn't
centers
get sour.
Yeah.
And they also, yeah.
So, which was wonderful for being able to travel across seas.
This was when Holland was in its prime as a powerful sea nation, and they had the embarrassment of riches, as I'm doing quotes, in that they had bountiful dairy products in Holland, and so they wanted to trade. And during colonizing, they wanted to spread that particular aspect of their culture. So you started to see in places like the Azores dairy cows and cheese making where it hadn't been before. The cheeses also didn't have to be as salty, because by taking out some of the whey, you were able to remove some of the food for the bacteria
That lactose
that are in the raw milk. Of course, is what they were using back then, or nowadays from the starter culture that we're adding to pasteurized milk or raw milk. Nowadays, the milk, of course, is much cleaner and lower in bacteria. So no matter what we're making, you guys probably in Australia and then us here, we're using some form of starter culture to help with the fermentation. But this is out of the Oxford Companion to Cheese, and this is essentially what it's all about. So in one sentence, it's describing exactly what I'm going to be going into in greater detail. But the reason why it's such a strong step is because when we take out the whey, we're removing that food that the bacteria used for fermentation. And by varying the amount that we take out and varying the amount of water we add back, and then the temperature that we will cook to, we can change the essential aspects of the cheese that are the moisture content and then the acidity. So in a sense, with this technique, which is very simple, we are doing major changes to the texture and flavor of the cheese after it ages. And it's just a way to go from cheddar type cheeses, which have that higher acidity, flakier texture, and get into cheeses that have a more supple texture, more sliceable, I would say. They don't fall apart when you slice them. And the flavors don't have the same potential to become sharp. Like an aged Gouda will become sweeter than, and an aged cheddar is going to become sharp. So that's essentially what's going on. And what I'm going to go into, what Rachel and I will go into now, is how we do curd washing. And it's either going to be to start cooking the curds in the whey, or it's going to be to finish off the cooking of the curds in the whey. And you will see why as we head on. The first step of the first part of the step, taking out whey, so taking out that food, and the cheese becomes sweeter overall. No getting around that. That's going to happen if we take out some whey. We're going to also combine that as we add the water in and raise the temperature to the final cook temperature. We're going to combine that with how we affect the starter activity. So in a cheese like Gouda, we're going to go up to 100 Fahrenheit on average, which is now around 38 Celsius. And we're going to then be slowing down the starter activity considerably as we go to that temperature, reducing it by like tenfold. But we've added enough starter in the beginning to compensate for that. And the other thing about finagling the temperature is we can make a harder cheese with higher temperatures. So if we give ourselves a greater range of the cooking, we can achieve making a harder cheese. If we slow the starter culture down by going, say, 102 or 100, even 104 with a mesophilic starter, we can make a much less acidic cheese. So we can play around with this second part of the step and really come up with a wide variety of cheeses. So if we're talking about the styles of cheese where we do the curd washing after cooking, then we're waiting till we've cooked the curds enough, till they're firm enough. And then we're going, this is like just like doing a cheddar make, for example, and getting to the end of it where we're satisfied where we are with our acidity and how firm the curds are. And we're draining down to where we have curds barely covered by whey, and then we're adding in water to finish off the process. So it's usually a lower temperature water. And this is for cheeses like, you know, we've broken this presentation into two parts. The first is the general technology, and the second, we're going to go into explain some varieties of wash curd cheeses that you might want to try making. I've made most of them, either in workshops or helping people set up their businesses, or coming in as a consultant to improve products and things like that. So we're going to use this lower, we're going to be cooling instead of adding hot water, we're going to use a lower temperature water to cool the curds, and this will increase the moisture content of the cheese. So rather than, say, making a cheddar, we're going to end up with what is called Colby. That's the most direct link to cheddar, would be Colby cheese. Fairly acid, but not as much as cheddar, but a bit higher in moisture and milder in flavor. So as we add this water in, the lactose is actually, some of that is moving out of the curds, and it's lowering the acidity, so preventing the cheese from becoming acid in the case of cheddar, and then getting Colby instead. When we just do this lightly, like there's a getting back to what's made here in Vermont still, that'll be at the end. I'll go into a little bit more about the granular curd type cheddarish cheese that's made here. and they kind of just spritz the curd with cold water, and then they tuck the salt into it, and that cheese is fairly. It's a bit higher in moisture than cheddar, a couple percentages more, and because of that, it develops kind of a bite, and it's a little bit like a very, very sharp cheddar in the end result, but that happens much sooner in the aging process than it would for cheddar cheese. So that's kind of interesting how that affects that. So now a little biochemistry here. So some things we're concerned about when we're doing the water addition is that if we add too much water or too little water, let's say, because here we're talking about adding a larger amount of water, we're going to be drawing more calcium out of the curds, and the curds become much more weak in texture. So they don't have that elasticity that we kind of expect in Gouda, and it slices well and can age quite a while. We're trapping, not only are we trapping more moisture, but we're lowering the calcium content, and so we get even risking ending up with cheese that's kind of gummy. And I've had Gouda that's like this a couple of times, and it's because they've chosen to do a higher level of water addition.
So more isn't always better.
More isn't always better, and it could be that they intended to have this cheese, trying to get the highest yield possible, and they intended to have it on the market very quickly. They weren't so concerned about having much flavor, but there is that risk of just getting a texture that isn't quite right. The cheese kind of sticks to the roof of your mouth when you're eating it, and I don't think anybody really wants to make a cheese like that. So we have to be careful about, what's the maximum that we can add and still get a good result. And on the other hand, we don't want our wash curd cheese to be too lactic in character, to be too cheddary, let's say. We don't want it to have a flaky texture. So we want that nice supple texture that is part of the appeal of this.
So somewhere between not enough and too much.
Yeah. So I've noticed, I'll mention this again as we go along when we talk about the actual varieties and how much typically whey is taken out and how much water is added. But we can even think of like trying to influence a traditional cheese that never was washed curd, never was made that way. Like I know in France with the Tome de Savoie type cheese, which is a cheese from the Alps. It's so popular that it got to where decades ago they began making it more industrially, so larger volumes, and they also wanted to appeal to a wider market. So they do a little bit of curd washing on the industrial version versus the farmstead version, and it makes the cheese markedly different. But it's not at all gummy. It still might be closer to cheddar, but it's just that much different, or closer to the actual artisan tone, but it might just that much different that the flavor, what accompanies the curd washing is the milder flavor. So, and that seems to be more appealing to the mass market, especially our market, and here in North America, not Quebec, Canada, but here in the rest of North America, people tend to gravitate towards still more milder cheeses on average. We're adding the water in again, and so we can use this step and change temperature to influence the moisture of the cheese and the acid development. So I think I just said that pretty much at length earlier, so we don't have to spend too much time on this. But I think this, again, when we're talking about slowing acid development or increasing it, it's really in that zone when we're making cheese with mesophilic starters. So we get above 95 and we start to see the bacteria slow down in their acid production. And then if we leave it more moderate temperature for as our final cook temperature, we can sustain a faster acid development. There are some wash curd varieties that rely on thermophilic cultures. And so those actually, we're going to see really the opposite, where as we increase the heat, the culture goes faster. So this is more appropriate to mesophilic cultures, this particular slide. Then we have a technique that is popular in Scandinavian cheese making, so like Havarti cheese. And this would be it's the process of making Havarti is very similar to making Gouda, but right within 20 minutes before you say, oh, I'm getting close to the firmness of the curd I like, and I see my acidities going the way I want it. And at that point, you're 15, 20 minutes out from the end, and that's the good time to add these small amounts of salt. We're not talking about a lot. And so this is the rate that is in the recipe. It's not going to affect the way the bacteria produce acid, but it is going to help with this point here, where we form a new complex that is able to bind water better in each curd particle. And so we can create a higher moisture cheese with a nice supple texture. And that is Havarti. The other thing that's interesting about it is that when we go to drain the whey off and we're making Havarti, we're going to be working the curds without much whey in there. And that's going to keep that texture very open. And I don't know if those of you in the audience here have had Havarti, but I know Jenny we were just talking about it with her, and it's got this very, very open texture. A lot of it has to do with the mechanical openings between the curds, but also a culture like a Gouda culture is employed so that we have carbon dioxide production. And that helps keep the openings between the curds open throughout the process of aging, and that's forms the texture of the cheese. So the salt addition also helps with that sort of a bit of toughening, I would say, around the curds so that they keep their shape. And this is actually done in some blue cheese making recipes just for that reason, to keep the curds from compacting together so much. So that's why you wouldn't do it when you're making Gouda or Edam, because you want a nice smooth texture where little gas bubbles can form. And so you would not get the right texture if you did that for those cheeses. So let's explore some varieties. And this picture is of a California-made St. George cheese, is what they call it. St. Jorge would really be the way to say it, but we call it St. George in the US, and there's still some makers of it out in California, because that is where the Portuguese mostly immigrated, and those of them who were dairy farmers began making their native cheese there. But essentially, it was a cheese that the Dutch brought to the Azores. But let's start with a couple other popular cheeses in the US. We're not talking about French Munster, Munster, or German Munster. We're talking here about, oh, we have a bit of a typo here.
Typo.
Yep, the M right here, this should be MUENSTR, as in the standards of identity for an American made cheese. But that's really a popular deli cheese for sure. Brick cheese is more like what the immigrants made when they came to the US. The American Munster is a milder cheese. The brick cheese is the stronger of the two, because the brick cheese is actually a washed rind cheese. So in addition to washing the curds during cheese making, during aging, the brick cheese is washed with a salt solution to promote the growth of yeast and bacteria, whereas the deli type American Munster is sprayed with a netto to create the look of that washed rind cheese, and it's quite a mild cheese. It's really popular here on sandwiches, So this is made in the typical range of a cooked curd cheese using a mesophilic starter. And when we get to the curd washing step, we've drained the whey down to about the level of the curds, and we're going to add the water in just to keep the same temperature. So we've cooked the curds already in the whey, and now we're going to add the water and maintain the same temperature. And actually, with this cheese, we're taking out quite a bit of whey. 50% of the original milk volume is taken out. And that brings us right down to almost the level of the curds. And then we're going to add in the same amount of water that we took out as whey. And so we're going to end up with a fairly low acid cheese after a day. You can see here 5.2 to 5.3 is at the upper end of the spectrum for cheese pH. Like a Swiss cheese would be up at this pH, 5.3, even 5.4. And so one last thought on this is that you don't want to have just no acid development in the vat, or you may not reach that pH. So there's this critical step where you're about ready to drain the whey off the curds for good and hoop the curds, and you want to have had your pH drop down a bit, like 0.2, and then you're going to be able to get on, and the culture is working well, and you'll end up with this the next day. If you don't get this pH down at a day later, the cheese will not age as well at all. It probably won't knit. The curds won't knit very well, and they're loaf-shaped cheeses, so they may lose their shape as they age.
Important to note also that French Munster is not a washed curd cheese.
Yeah, French Munster.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Same name, similar name, but
French Munster is about the size of a brie, so it's like a 1 kilo cheese, 2.2 pounds, and it's about the thickness of a brie, and it's made from very fresh milk. And it's made with a thermophilic starter. So Munster in French is monastery. So it is actually shoved more into this group of cheeses, which some of these varieties of these Trappist style cheeses do not have washed rinds. And that's because the curd washing step is trying to take cheese making that's now in our modern era, and you're working with milk that's not the freshest, not right from milking, as they made cheese at the monasteries, where I would call them the first craft cheeses, because the monks and the nuns made the cheeses, and the peasant farmers that lived around there did the milking and took care of the livestock. So these guys had periods of time in the middle of their day to make cheese, perfect amount of time. And they were working with very fresh milk. And so without any starter culture added, the acidity developed very slowly and kept the supple texture and the sweeter flavor in the cheese. So that is why, nowadays, when we're working like in this point here down at the bottom, we're trying to recreate that texture in the cheese. We can't just do that with milk that's been stored, and we're working with starter cultures, and we have to use thermophilic cultures with if we're not doing any curd washing to keep the acidity from developing too fast. And that's mainly because most of the acidification happens on the drain table. And so the thermophilic culture is not able to move very fast at, say, 70 to 80 degrees, which is your cheese room temperature. And so once the curds leave the vat with a little bit of acidity made, they're not going to end up as low in pH as cheeses that are going to be using a mesophilic starter. So essentially, here, let's go forward to the next one. We can look at one of them here, or two that are very similar. Morbier is like a raclette with a line of ash in the middle. And these are full fat cheeses with high moisture, so they have to be more than 45% fat and dry matter. But see here, because of curd washing, we're using a mixed culture that has mesophilic bacteria in it, and that curd washing will take away some of the food that they could use at room temperature to make a cheese that's more acid. Typically, this is the process with the volumes we take out, the whey equal to 30% of the original milk volume, and then replace with almost as much water. And the goal is to, again, end up at that pH that's at the higher end of the spectrum to help keep the texture supple and the flavor mild. All right. Then we have Gouda and Edam, which are the classic Dutch cheeses. And this illustrates that Gouda, we could put them together, right? Make a new cheese. No, this illustrates that Edam is a lower fat cheese, and indeed it's made by using skimmed milk. So when we talk about the ratio of protein to fat that we might use in making this cheese with Gouda, or in your case, we did this the last class. I had converted everything to fat to protein ratio, which you guys are probably more familiar with, but I'm just going to go with protein to fat tonight. So for Gouda, it'd be around 0.9 is really going to make a nice Gouda cheese. That's protein to fat. And so with the Edam, you're talking over 1, like 1.1 protein to fat. So you've got a little more protein than fat. You're going to skim down to like, from a 3.2 fat, you'll probably skim down to a 2.2 or 2.5% fat to make the Edam, and make sure it meets the standard and isn't too fatty. Other than that, the process is very similar. But here we have a great range in how much whey we might take out, because we can really manipulate the texture again and the acidity of the cheese by how much whey we take out. Typically, we're going to hit 100 Fahrenheit, so 38 degrees Celsius. And we're going to, as we do these steps of curd washing, the whey can be removed rather quickly because we don't want the curds to knit together in the vat. So we want to do that stuff fairly quickly. We usually put in a whey screen and then drain the whey out down to the level we want. And then as we add in the water, though, the idea there is to do more of a showering of the water in over the curds as they're being stirred again. So we're going to break up the curds in the whey, stir them around, get them all broken up and loose, moving in the whey, individual curd grains moving in the whey. And then we're going to start adding the water. And it would, instead of slugging it in a big dose, which might injure the bacteria, slow some of them down if it's getting too hot in one spot, we're going to add it evenly. And so the idea would be to have a ring or a pipe along the edge of your vat with holes drilled on the inside so that you can hook up your water hose to that and it would shower the water in slowly. Alternatively, you can just add it by hand in doses over about 15 minutes to reach the final temperature. And the typical water temp here is 130. But of course, that varies on the amount of whey you're going to take out. Because if you're not adding too much water back, then you're going to need to have it hotter. But you can also use the jacket to heat the curds in the whey after you've added all your water. And that's probably the best strategy, is put in the amount of water you want at 130 degrees and then finish the cooking by heating from the vat jacket. Colby has the same standards of identity as cheddar. And we're gonna, just like making cheddar, when the curds and whey are being stirred in the vat, we're gonna go for a fairly good increase in titratable acidity, or getting down to a pH of 6.15 by the time we're gonna drain. And at this time, we're getting ready to add this cold water. So we're draining the whey out and we're still stirring the curds in the whey to keep them from clumping together if we can. But if we can't, then we're going to have to, again, go through the process of stirring the curds up in the whey before we begin to add the water so that we can make sure the curds are all loose and not knitted at all. And then we can begin to add the water and keep stirring as we add the water, because we don't want to get any, went ahead. We don't want to end up with any clumps of curds that would be bad for the texture of our cheese. We're going to lower the temperature depending on how firm or less firm we want the cheese to be, how much moisture we want to retain in curds. And by the time we get to milling, not milling, by the time the stirred curds are being salted, we've gone up slightly more in titratable acidity, but we're nowhere near the level that we would use for cheddar. So at the time of salting, we're going to break the curds up, any lumps that are broken up, and then we're going to lay in the salt, mix it in real good, and let it mellow for some minutes before we hoop it. Now for the St. George story, and this is a real story of migration, immigration, and then opportunity from an entrepreneur. So we get Monterey Jack, the name coming into vogue through a trader named William Jacks, who was operating between what's Monterey Bay, in San Francisco, and he was shipping cheese up by boats that was made by these farmers down there to sell in San Francisco, and that became known as Monterey Jack's cheese, or now Monterey Jack cheese. So first was Monterey Jack's cheese because the guy's name was Jacks. So this is much more mellow of a cheese than Colby and much higher in moisture, because we are going to definitely lower the temperature all the way to 86, which is where we started when we started the process of adding starter culture to the milk. So essentially, we end up at the same temperature that we started at. That's a good way to remember how to make it. It's it's very popular in Mexican cuisine out there. It shreds easy. It's pretty mild. It's a great ingredient cheese, I would say, because it doesn't have a strong flavor if you're trying to bring out the other flavors in the foods. And it's a little bit more open texture than Colby, because we're letting we're adding the water and cooling this cheese a lot more, which helps keep the curds from knitting so much. So let's see. Yeah, it's typically sold at less than 60 days. In this country, it's usually made from pasteurized milk, but there are a couple of hangers on out there that make it the traditional way are still using raw milk, and I would say that that cheese gets a bit bitey as it ages, and they tend to age it longer than 60 days. So a lot like those Yankee cheeses that we have still here in Vermont, as they get to be much more mature cheeses, they get a little more of that butyric acid being developed and sort of characterizing the flavor. I just call that bitey. It's kind of like a prickly mouth feel to it. So it's not really sharp, like cheddary sharp, but it's still strong. Yeah, great. So let's finish up with some Scandinavian type C. Let's just go back to that Havarti. So you can see the difference in texture. And here's a cheese where we drain off all the way and let the curds work a bit before we hoop them. And here's a cheese where it's made more like Gouda, Danbo. And this is it's more like a baby Swiss. So it's employing more thermophilic cultures and then going through a warm room treatment to develop eyes. Whereas the Havarti is not going to be doing that. That's the texture pretty much it comes into the aging room with out of the brine. And it's let's explore that now. So these cheeses tend to be not so high in fat, but high in moisture. And the range would be like Havarti would be the more moist of the group, 46, and the Danbo would be the lower one that's closer to Gouda. That's what this cheese is. The lower fat is really important to the texture, because that's the way we can develop good eyes, get the gas bubbles to develop in the cheese, is to not have such a fatty milk to work with. And then, of course, that's going to characterize the flavor. And rather than the cheeses being so rich, they get some of the flavor from the diacetyl production from the culture. As it's producing CO2, it's also taking citric acid and making diacetyl, which gives it a buttery flavor, and like a cultured butter flavor. And so a bit sweet, a bit buttery, and then as it ages, rather than getting sharp, it will get more candy-like, like caramelized, as they get to be aged out. So so very similar to making Gouda, except that, and that's this one on the bottom is, this bullet point is for Havarti only. I would say these other ones are probably going to be made without adding salt to the curds in the way. So here we have a cheese that was developed in Iowa purposefully to be like a smaller version of Swiss. And they're never made in the great big wheels. They're always made in 5-10 pound wheels, even smaller. Definitely higher in moisture than a Swiss, and but equally low in fat. So they are made from milk that's been partially skimmed. Again, a ratio of like 1.1 will give you that kind of milk that will make good elastic texture and good eye development. And here we're definitely adding Propionibacterium as a culture along with the starter and later the cheeses will be put through a warm room period, and they will then develop this texture. So let's go to the details on that. This is a pretty specific recipe that uses Streptococcus thermophilus and Lactobacillus bulgaricus and the propionic bacteria. And so we're going to cook up above the 102, which would really slow down the mesophilic starter, but we don't have to worry about that. And again, similarly to all these other cheeses we made that aren't coming from a cheddar make, the pH is pretty high at draining the whey off. And I think that's why, we're seeing these textures that are so supple and so elastic, is because we're not developing all that acidity during the vat stage of the cheese make. All right. And finally, we have our Yankee cheese, and that's where, like I said, it's just kind of like you're making cheddar, and you move your curds then to a drain table for working, in quotes, because they call those things the work table. And that at that step, we're spritzing the curd with water. We're not actually doing that in the vat. And then salting and then pressing into wheels. So that's very specific here to Vermont. But now, just remember that because water is being used in the process, it's part of the cheese, it's an ingredient, and we have to be sure that the water is safe. And every time we put water in, that we can be confident that it's potable, that it doesn't have any coliform in it. And so I would be real happy to make a wash curd here at Parish Hill Cheese, wash curd cheese, because we have great water, but I would also want to keep up on my testing to make sure that I know it doesn't have any coliform in it. And that would be something I would put in my food safety plan, just to have a documentation that my water's been tested. So to wrap it up, before questions, which we have 10 minutes, just remember that these are some other key points, that because the cheeses have high pH, they're relatively low in salt, and they are going to be aged sometimes in conditions where we're above 50 degrees. We may even be at 60 to 70 to help stimulate carbon dioxide fermentation. We may run into problems if we use fermented feeds, and we're not operating a clean housing situation for our cows, and we get vectors spreading bugs from silage around. We're going to get some spores in the milk that are Clostridia, are notorious for causing problems during aging of these cheeses. So we want to really watch out and make sure we're getting the best feed going into the production of cheese like this. And if we have any concerns over the quality of the silage, we just wouldn't want to use that milk for this kind of cheese. Let's just make cheddar instead. And maybe we make these cheeses when cows are on, or our animals are on pasture. Yeah, I already talked about the spray method to add the water. And also, for this reason, that if we slog it in one spot, we're going to get problems. And don't forget that wash curd cheeses are made from all the milks. So like, for example, in Holland, there are beautiful sheep and goat milk Goudas that are exported. I've had both, and they're coming into the States, at least the goat one, fairly regularly. So yeah, it's just, again, it doesn't matter what milk you're working with. It's a powerful technique to change the overall quality of your cheese and create new texture and new flavor beyond cheeses that you wouldn't have washed the curd on. And don't forget this strange cheese that was one of the French king's favorites. So he had a couple cheesemakers go to Holland to learn how to eat them and come back and make it for him. And it had hung on and persisted to this day, still being made, mimolette. And it's, of course, so very French. So this is why you have all the cheese mites have been riddling this thing with holes. But the Dutch would not be happy with that.
They'd be horrified.
So at any rate, we can leave it there and go to questions. And we'll take our, there's the chat. Any of you currently making wash curd cheeses?
So we've got
anybody
making...
else? Oh, R. Bennett is making Gouda of Argentine yum.
Nice.
I want to try.
Oh,
okay, yeah.
Okay, so you have to read the question.
Yeah, can you please comment on water quality used to wash the curds? In Australia, typical potable water has both chlorine and fluoride in it. The levels of, I don't know about fluoride. I know that the levels of chlorine are not going to affect the what I just went through. So in fact, many makers of Gouda are in more urban areas where they have the same thing, and chlorinated water. And some people even use chlorine to add to the water to help prevent any sort of issues from coming, to be assured of the quality of the water on a regular basis.
Are there any quality issues that could develop through chlorine levels in water used for washed curd cheeses?
I would say no, if it's potable water.
That those chlorine levels would be low enough so as to not affect the cheese.
Yeah. What is this? Looks like egg yolk.
I think that was on the mimolette.
Oh, yeah. That's a lot of annetto they use that they add to the milk to get that color for the annetto.
Was the person who was making the...
So what, I wonder if R. Bennett, I don't know who you are, but do you want to comment on anything we presented? Are there any things that you've discovered that you would like to add, for example? No.
If you'd like to unmute, you're welcome, and talk further.
Yeah. It'd be nice to have a conversation around it because someone else would like to start making them. So we don't make them in our business. We make them when we teach classes. So we've seen what changing the amounts of, we've made raclette in class, we've made Gouda, we've made Havarti, we've made baby Swiss, and we've seen how we can manipulate we've made aged Gouda, which is a different recipe involving less water out. Less way out, less water in. We've seen how that all affects the textures and flavors of the cheeses. So I find it very interesting. We're much more traditional, like the way we're following more Italian and French methods in making our cheese. So we don't really do that, but.
Okay. So I'm not sure if everybody saw that question. So if you could just read it out, please, Peter, because I've got it.
Someone wanted to know if we were making wash curd cheeses.
Oh, right. Okay. There's another one about we've been getting excessive eye development in random batches of Havarti. Any idea? Did you see that question?
Yeah. So that means excessive gas production. And if it's not related to maybe getting the starter amounts wrong, I would say it would be a milk quality issue. We do see when we're doing our classes, we are using milk from the same farm, but they're on their wintertime program and they feed fermented hay that's in the wrapped bales, the big round bales. And generally speaking, we make good quality cheese, but occasionally we get gas development in the cheese that we wouldn't normally see in making that style. Like we just cracked open a Romano today that was made from lower fat milk. It had a nice granular quality. It was actually quite good. We've pretty much failed making that cheese every year because of the gas we get developing in there. But even in this wheel we opened up today for lunch, there were just a couple bubbles of gas in there, and the rest of it was beautiful. So I do think that there's something there with the feed, and it could be other vectors for bringing in bugs that are more able to produce gas in the cheese.
Just pop the webinar feedback link in there so people can provide their feedback on today's presentation.
And I don't know if that is something that JP.
No, R. Bennett.
No, that's me.
Bennett,
Yeah, it's the webinar feedback.
could maybe think about and get back to us, or just something that you may want to pursue. If you look at the records and stuff, you may be able to pick that out.
Yeah, Richard, if you want to contact Peter directly, yeah, he's very busy this week teaching, but after that, he'll be able to.
I would also say that when I worked with cheesemakers that make baby Swiss, there's a great group of them in Pennsylvania, the Amish and Mennonite farmers that make cheese, and they most of them make baby Swiss, and sometimes the baby Swiss batches are very, very gassy, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of the big eyes like we saw in the picture, there are lots of little ones, and excessively gassy and very bitey kind of flavor, because it's too much Propiani bacterial culture. That's another bacteria that can come from silage, is Propiani bacterium, and that will also create more gas in your cheese. So there's another idea too.
So Richard, you've started a video there, and would you like to speak? We can only see the cupboards.
All right. Can you see me now?
No.
No.
Oh,
can you reverse the camera?
There's an automatic camera.
Oh, there we are. Thank you.
So, yeah. So thanks very much for that. Yeah. No. I've got a watch talking to me now. Yeah. Silage sounds like it potentially is our issue. But we also have a good link with our farm, so yeah, potentially we can move that around. So just the occasional batches in the guys that we're getting.
Yeah, our culture guru suggested we use a mixed mesophile culture to try and reduce the gas development and try and get a more mechanically open cheese. So we've got a batch of that in progress at the moment. So hopefully we still get the butteriness of the Havarti, but without that eye development. So it'll be an interesting comparison there. The current culture for Havarti's got about 4 different mixes in it, and 2 are gas producers. So one must be, it could be potentially running a bit fast, but we're taking on board what you're saying about the silage and that also. So we're taking
that's another good angle to work from, is thinking about the starter, that you could have overproduction of gas coming from the starter, that you can find a different one, or if you're mixing them yourself, just back off on the gas producers. Yeah, that's a good idea.
One thing we're exploring at the moment is trying to get that cheese to the cool room after brining as soon as possible. So
good thought. Yeah. Aging at a lower temperature is certainly going to help suppress gas producers. We have a neighbor that went through a period of making tome type cheese. He does a sheep milk cheese and a cow milk cheese, and he was getting quite a bit of gas production. These were brined wheels, and he was making cheese from wintertime milk from the same farm that we get our milk from, but we only make cheese when they're on pasture. And he was getting gas starting in the middle of the wheels and just batch after batch. And this was when they were feeding the rat bales and sweet flavors like Swissier flavors in his cheese. And so, and that was one of the things that really helped steer him out of it. Was he just walled off part of his cheese aging cave and built and put in refrigeration so he could run that section at 45 degrees. And so the cheese went right out of the brine into the 45 degree the whole time it ages. Whereas his pasture based sheep milk cheese didn't. And bingo, it stopped doing it. And what he needed was that salt to diffuse into the center during a time when the cheese was colder. It takes a little longer, but it's not going to invigorate the bacteria to grow because it's too cold. So it bought him time to allow the salt to diffuse and then suppress, keep everything in balance. So I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So our time is actually up. So we're going to wind up now, but thank you very much, Rachel and Peter, for all the effort you've put into today. Greatly appreciated, given that you're so busy teaching, and also that you've done this at very short notice to really help us out. So I'm sure Australian cheesemakers will be most grateful. I've had quite a few people saying they'll be listening to the recording. So thanks.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Happy to do it. Apologize if I stumbled and bumbled a bit, but it's been a long day.